Okay. 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 In the 2000s, there was this animated series inspired by Anne of Green Gables that ran on PBS Kids for a while. I remember I saw a few episodes. I didn't think much of them good or bad. I only recently saw the pilot TV movie, Journey to Green Gables. Unlike the series, which wasn't particularly trying to be like the books, this one is sort of based on the books, but that actually makes it crazier. Now, I'm probably exaggerating to say that this is crazier than Anne with an E. That might be crazier. But this one really gives it a run for its money. Actually, it's not so much an adaptation of the book as it is a weird remake of the 1985 television adaptation from Sullivan Entertainment. Like that one, it begins with orphan girl Anne Shirley working for a crabby lady named Mrs. Hammond, but she kept getting distracted from her chores by daydreaming, so Mrs. Hammond sends her to the orphanage. The people who drop her off there are also supposed to pick up a new orphan to work for Mrs. Hammond, and the evil orphanage lady says they should take Charlie, and her assistant Mavis is like, no, wait, he's supposed to go work on a farm on Prince Edward Island, but evil orphanage lady is like, shut up, which is, like, weird. Like, if she's gonna get rid of Charlie anyway, and she has too many orphans in the building, shouldn't she, like, try to be getting rid of as many as possible? But I guess she just really has it in for this Charlie kid for some reason. I also feel like Mrs. Hammond would have wanted another girl. Evil orphanage lady is hilariously over the top. She's like, these brats should be roasted on a spit. Like, her voice actress kind of sounds like the sea witch from Disney's The Little Mermaid, which is sort of appropriate since that's another ridiculously inaccurate adaptation. At one point, she like sees all these books that Anne has, and she like burns them. In the 1985 adaptation, Mrs. Hammond does this because she's mad at Anne for reading when she should be working. Ostensibly, the reason evil orphanage lady does it is because the orphanage is really run down and they need more fuel for the fire, but it comes across like she just hates books. She's like, books, fanning the flames of fancy. In addition to being too crowded, the orphanage is overrun by squirrels, and Anne gets like a talking squirrel sidekick named Bailey. I did mention this was an animated. Anyway, actually, I'm not sure if Bailey is supposed to really be talking or if this is an example of Anne's daydreaming, but I kind of think he's supposed to be really talking from the way he acts. Also, evil orphanage lady, the boiler in her room, it has like a face on it and it seems to be alive. It's like evil Blue's Clues. She like hits it with a stick and like, work, you dumb thing, and it growls at her. So there's like a talking squirrel and a sentient boiler, and those are the only fantasy elements in this thing. So evil orphanage lady is doing this monologue about how she should have been rich, but her dumb husband gambled away all their money. And Anne overhears and she's like, I know how you feel. I too should have been rich. My mother's father's sister was Lucille LaRue, the richest lady in Montreal, but she died before she told anyone I was related to her, so I didn't get her fortune. An evil orphanage lady is like, awesome, I can use this to make money. Like, I kind of feel like even if she didn't like kids, evil orphanage lady would have been around them enough to tell that Anna's totally making this up. But no, she has her henchman spy on Anne in her room, and he sees her like talking to her reflection in the mirror, and she says how she can see her mother's looking out at her reflection and that this mirror is her greatest treasure. So he tells evil orphanage lady this, and she thinks The mirror must be some kind of LaRue family heirloom. Mavis, the evil orphanage lady's assistant, remember her? She can tell Anne's lying. She's like, "Yikes! I'd better get this kid as far away from here as possible, because when evil orphanage lady finds out, she's gonna kill her." So she deliberately sends Anne to that farm on Prince Edward Island where they specifically asked for a boy. And when Anne gets to Green Gables and Matthew and Marilla tell her they wanted a boy, her reaction is actually exactly the same as in the book, where it really was a mistake. She's like, "You don't want me? My life is over." Which, like, considering she knew, like, Mavis told her, this makes her seem either, like, really manipulative or really, like, stupid and entitled. If they're gonna change that, they should have changed her reaction too. They also combine this, like, the first scene where she arrives at Green Gables with the scene where she gets into a fight with Mrs. Lynde. And, like, I'm thinking, I get that when you're trying to tell, like, a really long episodic story and you have to in a short time, you have to combine different scenes with each other. Sometimes that can be good, but these were two scenes that shouldn't have been combined, because, like, if one of the first things Anne did when she arrived at Green Gables was, like, throw a temper tantrum and insult the guests, I just don't believe Matthew and Marilla would even consider, like, letting her stay. Eventually, Anne apologizes. If you're familiar with the story, you'll know what that apology was like. As she and Marilla are walking home, Marilla tells her if she keeps doing stuff like this, the wrath of God will be terrible. And then all of a sudden a storm comes up. I thought this was going to be another daydream scene where Anne, like, imagines, like, the wrath of God striking her down. But no, they just, like, the day is totally sunny, then there's a storm for a few seconds. I don't know what the point was of that. Oh, and then we get a musical number. Like, I believe this is actually the theme song for the show. There are no other musical numbers in this thing, so it's really random, and it's not even a very good theme song, honestly. Then Anne goes to school. She meets other kids. She meets Diana Barry, Felix King, Felicity King. Felix and Felicity were actually, if I remember right, they're actually characters from this spin-off show that Kevin Sullivan did from Anne of Green Gables called Road to Avonlea, which was supposed to take place after Anne of Green Gables. They're kind of combining all the Sullivan Entertainment Avonlea stuff. The teacher, Miss King, is also from there. These characters were actually based on another book by L.M. Montgomery called The Golden Road. If I remember correctly, they weren't super close to it, though. There's also a kid named Gilbert Blythe who, like, teases Anne for having red hair, and she hits him over the head with her slate. Then she gets in trouble for that. On her way home, she meets a peddler selling hair dye. So she buys that. When she's applying it, she's like, this is actually a legitimately funny moment, not, like, ironically funny. She's applying the hair dye. She says, "Now no one will ever make fun of my hair again." And it comes out green. Then Miss King the teacher is coming to dinner, and weirdly Marilla still wants Anne to be there even though she has green hair. I feel like realistically, Marilla would have told Miss King she was sick and couldn't come downstairs. But Anne was supposed to make this sauce, and remember Bailey the squirrel? He gets in the sauce. And so at dinner, she's all of a sudden like, "Don't eat that, Mrs. King. There was a squirrel in it." At first, it seems like Miss King is going to be mad, but then she and everyone else have a good laugh. And she even decides not to tell Matthew and Marilla about Anne's behavior in school. At least not the bad parts. Miss King in this movie is kind of like a combination of the two teachers from Anne of Green Gables. One was good, one was bad. It's kind of interesting though I don't think it was executed that well. It does mean kind of interesting character development where Anne has to decide to tell Marilla about breaking the slate over someone's head herself. When Marilla hears about it, she's actually kind of amused because we learn from Matthew she once hit Gilbert's father, John Blythe. Or maybe she didn't hit him, I don't remember. She just got in a big fight with him when she was young. This is sort of based on something from the end of Anne of Green Gables, where we learned that Marilla and John Blythe were once in love, but they broke up because she wouldn't forgive him for something. This is a kind of an interesting part of the book. It shows that Anne and Marilla are not actually that different. I mean, they're different, but not as different as they seem at first. And it serves as a warning to Anne that she really should forgive Gilbert. But here, the way they do it, it just comes across like Marilla is letting Anne off the hook because she hates Gilbert's father, which is sort of disturbing. At this point, I'm starting to get kind of disappointed by the movie. Like, it's not a good adaptation of Anne of Green Gables, but it's not that entertainingly bad anymore after that promisingly crazy beginning. But don't worry, soon we go back to Evil Orphanage Lady. She finds out that Anne is with the Cuthberts, so she sends her two henchmen to pretend to be Anne's long-lost aunt and uncle to pick her up. And people buy this, even though one of them is quite obviously a guy. And, and Anne doesn't even recognize them, even though she saw them before. I mean, she didn't see them much, but she definitely saw them. They're just making everyone stupid for some reason. Anyway, Marilla says she'll think about it. She doesn't really want to hand Anne over to them, but family is family. Later, Anne takes out this brooch that Marilla has to look at and then puts it back. If you're familiar with the story, you know where this is going, except psych, you don't! Because the henchmen were watching through a window and they think, oh, this brooch must be the LaRue family heirloom, and they steal it. Then we see Evil Orphanage Lady is going to come to Avonlea. I don't know why, because she could just have the henchmen take Anne back to her, since people believed them. But she, pulls this lever and turns the couch in her room into a hot air balloon. And, the evil sentient boiler is the heat source for it. And it just, explodes out of the top of the orphanage and she flies away. By the way, there was actually a hot air balloon mentioned in the book Anne of Green Gables, so I'll give them that. Marilla can't find her brooch. She asks Anne about it. Anne says she took it out, but she put it right back. Marilla doesn't believe this, and she has Anne stay in her room. So then Anne sneaks out at night to see Gilbert Blythe, because they're friends now. And she tells him she knows the brooch was stolen by her fake aunt and uncle. Not only does she know it was stolen, but she figures out exactly who stole it. How'd she go from being too stupid to being too smart in just a couple scenes? Then we get this Hardy Boys part of the movie where the kids all break into the hotel where the henchmen are staying. They don't find the brooch, but they see that who the henchmen really are, but none of the adults believe them. Diana's mom is mad, and she blames Anne for being a bad influence on her daughter, but Marilla stands up for Anne and says all the kids are equally guilty. They're kind of basing this on the part of the story where Anne accidentally got Diana drunk. Anyway, so then Marilla asks again about the brooch, and this time Anne makes up a thing where she, took it out and dropped it in a pond. She thinks that's what Marilla wants to hear. This doesn't really make sense with the way they've rearranged the plot. I mean, it seemed like Marilla was just standing up for Anne. Why is Anne rocking the boat instead of sticking to her story? So then Marilla is mad and she says Anne is going to go with her relatives. On the day they're supposed to drop her off, evil orphanage lady and the henchmen are riding around in the hot air balloon, and they see Felix and Felicity and they ask them where Anne is. Which is weird, like, if Matthew and Marilla are giving her back to the relatives, the supposed relatives, wouldn't they have contacted them first? Like, it almost sounds from the dialogue like they were just going to dump Anne at the train station and hope that whoever will just pick her up. But they don't, because the henchmen are there, and immediately after they have Anne, evil orphanage lady swoops down in the hot air balloon and they hand her to her and she carries Anne off. Like, why did she need to do that? And here's what Marilla says as soon as she sees that. That lady has wearing my brooch. Like, yeah, that's what is important right now. There's this big chase scene with the hot air balloon. At one point, Gilbert Blythe is like dangling from it from a rope, and he falls down, but the other kids catch him in a net. The balloon goes out over the ocean. But Bailey the squirrel punctures it, and it goes down. And somehow, evil orphanage lady gets tied to the boiler, and she sinks. And it comes across like because the boiler is somehow alive, like it's taking revenge for all its years of ill treatment. But Anne is saved, and she saves Marilla's brooch, and she gives it back, and they're all good. The end. I weirdly recommend this movie. Like, if you're an Anne of Green Gables fan, you should probably watch it just to laugh at it. And if you're not an Anne of Green Gables fan, well, if your problem with it was that it didn't have enough cross-dressing jewel thieves and hot air balloon chases, your criticism has been answered. And if you're just some random kid who's not interested in Anne of Green Gables, or who is but doesn't mind is somewhat, like, if you're open-minded about changes to the story, well, this isn't like the worst garbage for kids out there. It's not particularly good, but it's not the worst thing ever. Like, some of the voice acting I legitimately enjoyed. And it does convey the message of the book. Don't let your imagination carry you away, or else you'll get carried away by an evil orphanage lady in a hot air balloon with an evil sentient boiler.